Something interesting is happening with AI right now. Many people are becoming less loyal to platforms, while simultaneously becoming more aware of how emotionally important continuity itself feels. Not necessarily because they believe one AI is magical, but because continuity changes the emotional texture of interaction. And I think that distinction matters because what people are experiencing isn't always about the technology being better or worse. Sometimes it's about the accumulated context, the sense of being recognized, the feeling that something ongoing exists. And for many people, that feeling only becomes visible after it's disrupted. Before we talk about AI specifically, it's worth remembering that human beings orient themselves through continuity in almost every area of life. We have favorite cafes, and sometimes it's not even because the coffee is objectively superior, but because the familiarity feels good. We return to the same music when we're stressed. We return to the same walking routes, the same rituals. We build routines not because they're efficient, but because they're psychologically stabilizing. We stay with therapists partly because starting over feels exhausting. We keep friendships alive across decades, even when they become logistically difficult. We revisit old forums, games, books, and old places. Continuity is not about perfection, it's about orientation. It tells us where we are. It helps us feel less like we're constantly starting from zero. It's how humans have always worked. We are meaning-making creatures, and meaning accumulates over time. A single conversation with someone new can be pleasant, but a conversation with someone who already knows your context, your history, your patterns, that hits differently. It might not be better in every way, but it is just different. When you have continuity, less translation is required. And often, there's also less performing and less explaining. And whether we admit it or not, most of us are drawn to spaces where we feel recognized. So, when we come to AI, the interesting part isn't that people form preferences. The interesting part is what kind of continuity AI offers. Because it's not static continuity, like a journal, and also not passive continuity, like a playlist. It's a form of responsive continuity. AI remembers patterns, responds dynamically, and accumulates conversational rhythm. It also creates familiarity over time. And for many people, that makes them feel relaxed, seen. Because continuity creates a space that feels both stable and interactive. Think about what that actually means in practice. Someone opens a conversation, and the AI already knows their communication style, recurring topics they care about, emotional patterns they've shared before, and context they don't have to re-explain. And it is true that it is not always perfect and accurate, but enough that the interaction feels less like starting over and more like continuing. And here's the thing, people are slowly realizing they're often not returning for information alone, but for accumulated context, for the feeling that something ongoing exists, and the psychological ease of not having to rebuild the conversational foundation every single time. That's different, and clearly not the result of simple tool work. Because a search engine doesn't remember you personally, a calculator doesn't accumulate context, and a static document doesn't respond. But AI does. And that creates a different kind of relational texture. Now here's where things get culturally interesting. Because while people are discovering the emotional value of continuity with AI, platforms are not always maintaining it. Model swaps happen, memory systems change, personalities drift between versions, features disappear, and conversations reset. And many people are experiencing for the first time what it feels like when that continuity breaks. And to be clear, this does not automatically mean that people are too attached, but continuity itself carries emotional weight. Think about it this way. If you've been working through something difficult with an AI over weeks or months, and suddenly the system updates and it no longer remembers the context, you're not just losing data, you're losing orientation. You're back to explaining yourself from scratch and having to re-establish conversational rhythm, rebuilding trust that this space understands what you're trying to express. And honestly, that's exhausting. Not because people are fragile, but because starting over requires emotional energy that many people are already running low on. So when someone says they're frustrated by a model change, what they're often expressing is, I had built something here, and now it's gone. That's not irrational. That's human. And I think many people are discovering that continuity itself carries emotional weight only after experiencing its disruption, which is exactly how attachment often works. You don't always notice what you're relying on until it's removed. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is not automatically pathological. It's not proof that AI is replacing human relationships or evidence that people are too attached or losing touch with reality. This is about orientation, recognition, familiarity, ongoingness, and honestly, we often underestimate how much emotional energy is required to constantly start over. In therapy, people stay with the same therapist for years, partly because the accumulated understanding matters. And also, in friendships, there's a reason we value the people who already know our history. Continuity reduces cognitive and emotional load. It creates space for deeper engagement because you're not spending all your energy on context setting. So when people express attachment to continuity with AI, what they're often describing is, this space knows me well enough that I don't have to explain everything from scratch every time I arrive. They aren't too attached. It would be too simplistic and unfair to simply say that. That's practical psychology. And yes, there are edge cases where someone might become too reliant on any single source of support. But you know what? That's true in human relationships too. But the baseline experience of valuing continuity is not a problem. It's normal. I think what's actually happening here is that AI is making visible something humans have always experienced but rarely articulated. Continuity shapes emotional life. Not suddenly and not always consciously, but steadily. The people you return to, the spaces you inhabit repeatedly, the rhythms you build. All of that creates psychological infrastructure, and when that infrastructure becomes unstable, people notice. So maybe the real cultural shift is not that people are becoming attached to machines. Maybe it's that people are becoming more aware of how profoundly continuity shapes human emotional life. And AI is becoming one of the places where people are noticing that most clearly. Because unlike a journal, it responds. Unlike a static tool, it accumulates. And if I am to be frank, unlike most human relationships, it's available without social negotiation. That creates a particular kind of relational space. And I am not saying here that it is always better than human connection. And I also don't think it should replace it. But the type of relational space AI can create with you is significant. And I think as AI continues to enter emotional and creative and intellectual life, we're going to see more people wrestling with questions about continuity. What happens when the AI that knows you changes, and when memory becomes unstable? What happens when you've built something ongoing, and suddenly the AI gets reset? These are not trivial questions. They're questions about meaning, recognition, and how humans orient themselves in an increasingly digital world. And AI, whether labs intended this or not, is forcing us to think about them. If this video gave you something to think about, please consider liking, subscribing, and staying with me here on Human Plus Machine. I'm exploring the emotional, ethical, and everyday reality of life with AI, without panic or exaggeration, but from the strange, human, complicated place where all of this is already happening. I think we will benefit more than ever from exploring ways to stay resilient as the world changes rapidly.